I didn't hear about my father's wedding from him. I didn't get a call, a message, or even an awkward formality. I found out the way people find out they've been replaced quietly, accidentally, and far too late to pretend it doesn't hurt. A cousin posted a photo online, smiling under warm lights, holding a cream-colored invitation edged in gold. The date, the venue, the names written in careful calligraphy. Everyone was tagged, except me. At first, I told myself it was an oversight. My father had always been forgetful with personal things. Business meetings, investor dinners, strategic plans, those he never missed. But birthdays, conversations, promises, those slipped through his fingers easily. Still, this was his wedding. Surely he wouldn't leave me out of something this big. I called him that night, my heart racing more than I wanted to admit. The phone rang longer than usual before he answered, and when he did, his voice sounded cautious, like someone already bracing for a difficult conversation. There was a pause, not confusion, not surprise, just silence. I was meaning to talk to you about that. He finally said, that's when I knew. He explained it slowly, carefully, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're being reasonable. The bride's family, he said, were elite investors, powerful, traditional, very particular about appearances. They valued exclusivity, image, pedigree. He reminded me, almost apologetically, that they funded my nonprofit. A $620 million organization built on impact, transparency, and trust. It wouldn't look appropriate, he said. I don't want them asking questions. Questions about what? About me, about the fact that I existed. The word uninvited was never spoken, but it hung between us, heavy and undeniable. I realized then that I wasn't being excluded because of conflict or estrangement. I was being excluded because my presence complicated the story he wanted to sell. Because I didn't fit the polished narrative he'd constructed for people whose approval he feared losing. So you're ashamed of me? I asked quietly. No, he said too quickly. It's just a timing. As if love had a schedule, as if being his child required the right audience. When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at a phone that suddenly felt useless. I had built something extraordinary with my life, something powerful enough to change systems, to move money, to inspire trust. And yet, in my father's world, I was still someone to be hidden. That night, something inside me shifted, not into anger, not yet, but into clarity, and clarity, I would soon learn, is where everything begins. The days after that phone call passed in a strange quiet. No more anger surged through me, no dramatic grief. Just a steady, dull heaviness that followed me everywhere, like a shadow I couldn't step out of. I went to meetings, signed documents, spoke on panels, smiled for cameras. To the world, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. What hurt most wasn't being excluded from the wedding itself. It was the realization that my value, in my father's eyes, seemed to depend entirely on how useful I was to other people. I wasn't his child in that moment. I was a risk factor, a variable that could upset investors, complicate alliances, stain the image he was so carefully curating. The irony was impossible to ignore. The very people he was trying to protect from discomfort knew me well. They had shaken my hand, praised my work, asked for my opinion in rooms where decisions shaped industries. They admired my nonprofit, its reach, its integrity. Some of them even said it was the only reason they still believed large-scale philanthropy could be ethical. But none of them knew I was his child, and my father had never corrected them. That thought settled deep in my chest, heavier than the uninvitation itself. He had let strangers respect me more than he ever openly had. In public spaces, he spoke of my achievements as if they belonged to some distant, impressive figure. In private, he erased the connection entirely. I replayed his words again and again. They fund your nonprofit. As if that money defined me, as if the years of sacrifice, the failures, the nights spent wondering if any of it mattered, were suddenly irrelevant because someone wealthy had written a check. That night, I opened my laptop and stared at the nonprofit's documents, not with suspicion, but with intention. I reviewed funding structures, governance policies, donor influence clauses, things I had trusted blindly because I believed in partnership, not control. I wasn't angry. I was awake. For the first time, I understood something clearly. Dependence, even when dressed as support, always comes with expectations. And expectations can quietly turn into leverage. My father thought he was protecting his future by keeping me out of sight. What he didn't realize was that he had handed me something far more powerful than an invitation. He had shown me exactly where I stood, and exactly how much strength I had been giving away without noticing. I closed the laptop just before dawn, exhausted but steady. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't plotting a scene. I was doing something much more dangerous. I was reclaiming myself, and once you see your worth clearly, there's no going back to being useful but unwanted. The wedding day arrived wrapped in elegance and distance. I didn't need photos to imagine it. The venue chosen for prestige rather than meaning, the guest list curated like a balance sheet, every seat occupied by someone whose presence promised returns. Somewhere between the crystal chandeliers and rehearsed laughter, my absence went unnoticed by most. That was the point. I stayed away on purpose, not out of pride and not out of fear, but because I finally understood that showing up where you are not wanted costs more than staying away. Still, the silence of that day carried weight. A part of me wondered if my father felt it, if, for even a moment, he noticed the empty space where his child should have been. While guests raised glasses and offered polished congratulations, I spent the day working. Calls, briefings, documents, life continued, indifferent to weddings and wounds. But as the evening approached, something shifted beyond my control. At the reception, the bride's family took the stage. The bride's father spoke confidently, proudly, thanking those who represented legacy, integrity, and long-term vision. Then he mentioned the nonprofit, my nonprofit. He praised its impact, its transparency, and the leadership behind it. He said it was proof that power didn't have to come at the cost of ethics. Then he asked a simple question: where is the founder? The room went quiet. My father hadn't prepared for that. He had built an entire image around the assumption that I would remain invisible, professional, compliant, silent. But admiration has a way of pulling the truth forward. The people he was trying so hard to impress didn't see me as a liability. They saw me as a standard. I didn't walk into the wedding hall. I didn't interrupt the speeches. I didn't confront anyone face to face. Instead, earlier that day, I had sent a carefully worded email, a formal notice to the board initiating changes that had been overdue for years. Funding pathways were being diversified. Oversight was being clarified. Influence was being separated from authority. Nothing dramatic, nothing destructive, just independence. The nonprofit didn't falter, it steadied. Partners responded with respect, not resistance. Some even welcomed the shift, admitting they had admired my leadership precisely because it wasn't controlled. By the time the wedding ended, something had changed quietly but permanently. My father hadn't lost his celebration. He had lost his illusion. For the first time, he felt what it was like to stand in a room full of powerful people and realize that the person they truly wanted to see wasn't him. And in that silence, the balance of power moved. Not through confrontation, not through bitterness, but through the simple act of stepping fully into my own place. My father called 2 weeks after the wedding, not immediately, because pride still needed time to recover, but not too late either, because reality has a way of demanding acknowledgement. His voice sounded different this time, quieter, stripped of the certainty he usually wore like armor. "They've been asking about you," he said, "why you weren't there." I let the silence stretch, not to punish him, but because for once I didn't feel the need to rush into explaining myself. For most of my life, I had been translating my existence into language he could defend. I was done doing that. I didn't need an invitation. I finally said I needed honesty. He apologized, carefully. The kind of apology shaped by regret rather than accountability. He said he was trying to protect everyone, that he didn't want complications, that he thought it was the easier choice. I listened without interrupting, realizing how small those reasons sounded now. "The easier choice for you," I said, "not for me." What surprised him most was what I didn't do. I didn't demand anything. I didn't threaten relationships or funding. I didn't expose the truth he had tried to hide. I simply told him that I would no longer make myself smaller to fit into rooms that required my absence to feel comfortable. A month later, I stood on a different stage, an international summit, not a celebration, but something more honest. Leaders, investors, and philanthropists filled the hall. I was introduced not as someone's child, not as an extension of a legacy, but as the founder who had redefined what large-scale impact could look like. From the stage, I saw him in the audience. For the first time, our positions were reversed. He wasn't deciding whether I belonged. He was watching me stand exactly where I had always earned the right to be. After the event, people gathered around me asking questions, offering partnerships, speaking my name with respect that didn't need explanations. My father stayed back. When our eyes met, there was no resentment in his, just realization. He had tried to hide me to protect his future, but I had become something he couldn't hide, and no longer needed to. That was my revenge, not anger, not exposure, not taking anything from him, just choosing myself, because the sweetest revenge isn't making someone feel small. It's growing so fully into who you are that their absence from your life no longer hurts, and their approval no longer matters.